to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's weekly podcast on the big events and conversations happening in the Middle East and the broader region. My name is Amberin Zaman, and I'm taking over from Al Monitor President Andrew Parasiliti this week to talk to Sherri Talabany, the co-founder of SEED, an NGO that's based in Iraqi Kurdistan. SEED promotes women's rights in a deeply patriarchal part of the world. It runs programs to combat human trafficking, online sexual exploitation, and also helps to rehabilitate women and children who were enslaved, abused, and deployed as child soldiers by the Islamic State. I've known Sherri for many years and attended her fundraising events in Washington. And I have to say, I find her to be quite remarkable. Welcome to our show, Sherri. It's great to have you here.
It's great to talk to you, Amberin. Thank you.
Sherri, you and the team at SEED are doing critical work helping the Yazidi victims of ISIS heal their wounds. You work with women who were enslaved, raped, abused. You're also helping some of the thousands of young Yazidi boys forced to fight and engage in atrocities like public beheadings. I just read your disturbing report on child soldiers and was struck by a quote from one of the boys who says, "I wonder who I am and what is the right or wrong way to live or be." Can you please tell us more about your work with these kids?
Yeah, so we've been working with the Yazidi community for 5 years now, since early in the crisis, working to support the recovery, to empower survivors of sexual and other kinds of violence. They're all displaced in Kurdistan still. We have 750,000 who remain displaced. And I'd say when we think about the children and their needs, they're extremely complex needs. Children are extremely vulnerable, especially vulnerable. They've been impacted at such a formative stage of their development. They've had a completely disrupted childhood, exposed to horrific levels of violence and loss. And so now they suffer from complex mental health issues, identity issues, which you touched upon. And these children really require specialized rehabilitation and support. For the most part, Yazidi boys that were captured, they were very young, captured with their mothers, maybe ages 9 and up. They were separated from their mothers and were forced to be child soldiers. So, you know, it's critically important for Iraq and Kurdistan's future, for our safety, for our security, that we attend to the needs of these young children.
Are you working with any international agencies or with the Iraqi government? Is there any kind of program in place to help these kids recover, reintegrate into society?
Yeah, so actually you touch on the key issue, which is there is a huge gap. We don't have a strategic framework or a policy framework to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate children that were associated with the armed groups. And so what we've seen is, for the most part, Yazidi boys have been released to their families and reintegrated in their communities without the typical DDR or demobilization program that helps to rehabilitate them, helps to address their mental health needs, helps to address their physical needs. They have huge medical needs because they were exposed to such physical violence, and they've been coerced to participate in armed hostilities. And it really makes it difficult to reintegrate them. So we've been serving these boys for at least 3 or 4 years now. And I think we've served about 30 boys. And now we have programming funded by the US government to deepen our work with these children. And we're trying a whole range of comprehensive, maybe you can call it wraparound services, case management, mental health, legal services, cash assistance to help the families. And we're working with the individual children, and we try to integrate them with children of their own age so that they don't face a lot of stigma. These kids do face a lot of stigma. So we try to reintegrate them with other children. And we also work with their parents and caretakers, because many of these boys can express, aggressive behavior, and unhelpful behavior, and the parents really struggle with how to reconnect with them. The boys are often experiencing PTSD, depression, anxiety, and they're emotionally cut off with their own family. And they really feel torn and feel connected to their old life as soldiers.
Isn't the Iraqi government doing stuff with the UN on this as well?
The government of Iraq has been working with the UN for the last year or two to create an action plan to address these children that are all across Iraq, right? They're not just Yazidis in Kurdistan,
right.
but they're children from every group, and they're not just here. They're in Mosul and Baghdad and all across Nineveh, to reintegrate these children. So I hope that the action plan that they've been working on will be approved. It's not as comprehensive as what we've seen in other countries, but it's a start, and it provides an overarching framework.
The fact that the Yazidis are such a closed society must make your work that much harder, and life for survivors that much harder. All of these boys will have been converted to Islam and obviously brainwashed. How does one shake that off?
Yeah, so as I said, the kids are generally sent back to their families. So they're in camps, or some of them live out of the camps. About 350,000 Yazidis live in camps, and so the remainder are integrated into communities. They're extremely poor. They live in dire poverty. So access really isn't a problem. And so, we see a mix. We see some that maybe they have a closer identity with Islam. They have been trained and brainwashed. They have been trained and brainwashed in violence, in their views about women, their views about their own community. So some of them reject their own community. And some just reject their families. They feel no emotional connection. And it's like kind of what we would think about gang violence. They felt empowered when they were soldiers, and they were groomed for this violence. So many of them really struggle with their own identity, with the emotional connection. And some really have sympathy towards ISIS, and they want to get back to ISIS. And so we don't tackle that issue head on, because we feel that would be kind of counterproductive. What we try to do is address their mental health needs, because many of them have been exposed to extreme violence. And so treating, trauma. And then in terms of their social needs and their social connections, we really work to try to build that emotional connection with their family. And we're going to, in this new program, tackle this sort of belief, this hard black and white thinking that really allows kids and adults to connect with radicalism. And so we're trying this new and innovative approach, which really tries to tackle how they think and to get them to think. Because, children in Iraq and Kurdistan aren't really taught to think. They're taught to respect their elders and follow what they're told to do. And so that really creates really great child soldiers, right? So what we want to encourage is critical thinking and strengthen their own empowerment. And we think through this, we can tackle the radicalism that they've been exposed to.
So just to bring it home to our audience a bit, could you sort of describe a particular case that really struck you, a boy who really sort of, embodied all this horror in his being?
Yeah. So we've had a few, like, really, I don't meet the cases myself, but we've had a few cases which really stand out and required, a whole organization to think about how to support these children. So we had two boys. They were quite young, I think 7 and 9 when we started working with them, and they were separated from their mother, and they were separated from each other. And one came back speaking Turkish. So the native mother tongue for Yazidis is Kurdish, Kurmanji Kurdish mostly, and he spoke only Turkish and not Kurdish. and not Arabic. And the other child spoke only Arabic and not Kurdish or Turkish. And their mother was deaf.
Oh my
So,
God.
so they had some sort of basic signing that they had done within the family. But one of the tasks was to find a common, language that they could communicate. So they can reintegrate with the rest of their family. Both boys were retaught Kurdish, and they recovered after about 6 or 8 weeks. They were pretty functional again. They had severe medical needs, both of them. We've had so many severe medical needs by these kids. And of course, they come back malnourished. And the mother was deaf, and she was also a survivor of ISIS. She was taken into captivity. So the whole family had to come back together and have a lot of support to encourage their healing and to be able to reconnect emotionally. Now, we have found that the younger they are, the easier they are to reach. They yearn for that love and connection with family, but it also, we have to remember that some of these boys weren't really emotionally connected with family prior to being taken, and older children really have a harder time. We've found that we have a harder time reconnecting. So we had a teenage boy who was intent on destroying his family's home and set his tent on fire many times, and really just wanted to escape and go back. And we were able to, over a long period of time, we have to deliver services over 6 to 9 months, and this is really a short period of time for the needs that exist. But we have many children to serve, so we were able to reconnect this teenager. But it takes a long time.
Oh, I'm sure. And you mentioned that the mother who was deaf, who was also captured by ISIS, enslaved by ISIS, and you have been working with such women. Can you tell us a little bit about those women? And also, particularly, there's also this added layer of tragedy where some of them have had children with these Islamist fighters, and the children are not accepted by the community, and many have been forced to leave the kid behind. Some have chosen to stay behind to keep the kid. Can you tell us a little bit about that too, Sherri?
Yeah, so we all know what happened to these women. They were trafficked, they were abused, they were enslaved, they were sold, and they lived in constant terror and fear. Some of them for many years, which really leads to a complex trauma, which is really hard to address. And of course, they come home to stigma, they come home to judgment, harassment sometimes. And I think within the family, they've really been accepted, but there's still skepticism, right? And so they face really complex, multi-layered challenges, mental health issues, physical. They had terrible medical and reproductive health issues, and they have a lack of access to safe, housing and privacy. They're intense, and they're really on the edge economically. Poverty, stigma, and as you said, many of them faced unwanted pregnancies and were denied the right to parent their own children. So, of course, they need mental health services, and they need case management, where we look at their housing, we look at their safety, do safety planning, we look at their legal and protection needs, and we look at their medical needs, and we try to access all of these services and provide them care. And we provide integrated and holistic care, and usually it lasts for about 6 to 7 months. And so we try to protect their rights and follow their wishes. All of our services are survivor centered. That means that we're protecting their rights and following their wishes. And so many of these women that have been deprived their children, it's a really complex and critical and difficult issue for the community. And I'm sure you know that they face rejection should they decide that they want to parent their own children.
There's this new Yazidi survivors law, right, that's just been passed. Can you tell us about that and what effect it's likely to have?
Yeah, so this is such a critical step forward in recognizing supporters of female survivors of ISIS, of conflict-related sexual violence. But the key will be to see effective implementation and equitable implementation of the law. So we and other Yazidi activists, NGOs, UN, other governments have all been working with the Yazidi community to address the urgent needs, the recovery and reintegration of survivors. But there are so many gaps, and there really needs to be a formal process to try to protect their rights and to help their recovery and to address their needs. So the law is a really important step forward. And I should say it's meant to benefit not just Yazidi survivors, but Christian, Turkoman, Shabak women that were also taken into captivity and affected by ISIS. It recognizes that this was an act of genocide by ISIS. And it commits the government of Iraq to ensuring justice for survivors and to provide them with the financial and healthcare and education and other services and needs that they have, as well as financial reparations, which is so critical. So it also addresses that the government of Iraq has an obligation to search for those that are missing or remaining in captivity, because we still have about 2,800 people that we don't know where these women and children are. So I think it's a really important, critical step forward. And so we hope to see the law implemented in a fair way, in an equitable way, in a survivor-centered way. That means that the women's privacy and confidentiality and dignity is protected and that their rights are protected. So I think it's a really important step forward.
Online sexual exploitation is a pretty big issue in Iraqi Kurdistan, as it is the world over. Young women and men get duped into sharing intimate photos, which are then used to blackmail them. The problem is getting worse as people spend more time online because of the confinement imposed by COVID. Can you tell us about your program to help such people avoid entrapment?
Sure. Well, this is a growing problem everywhere in the world, and especially vulnerable are women and girls in conservative societies like Kurdistan and Iraq. And so we're seeing image-based, social media-based exploitation where a girl could have been in an intimate relationship, and there were photos taken, or even, her photo could be manipulated to show her in a vulnerable way, in a sexual way, or even with short sleeves could make some women and girls vulnerable. And so we are finding that they're being exploited for money, for sex. And so it's really a high risk for young people, young women mostly. Also, the LGBTI community is extremely vulnerable to this because it's considered shameful to be LGBTI in Iraq. And so we're seeing people being exploited because of these vulnerabilities. And so we've been working to educate young people about safe behaviors, smart choices, and to empower them to make smart choices about their relationships and their bodies, and to stay safe online. And so it's really, really important. And soon we'll be launching a new program called Seed Girls, which is really targeted to young girls to help them make smart choices about their lives, and to empower them and to help them be, safe in their lives and have healthy lives.
And I bet that many would like to be like you. And so that's kind of threatening to the men in the society that you operate in. Can you tell us a little bit about how life is for an American woman, who's married to a very, prominent political figure who comes from this very famous family, How does that work? How have you succeeded, first of all, to navigate this patriarchal society? Because let's face it, that's what it is. And second, how have you managed to forge an identity of your own, separate from that of your husband?
Wow, these are great questions. So, fortunately, I was pretty established in my career and in my marriage before I moved to Kurdistan, um, and I have a long history in Kurdistan, and I started working here in 1998 and 99. I was with the U.S. government, and so I know a lot of people. I have relationships with a lot of people. And so it was easy for me to establish myself here. I was respected, and maybe there's a bit of a double standard because I'm a Western woman. There are no limitations, and I think I married somebody who was raised by strong, independent women. The men in his life were comfortable with strong and independent women. He was raised by his grandmother, who was a poet. She was a writer, and her husband was a political leader and an intellectual. And my mother was the wife of Jalal Talabany, the former president of Iraq, and he was, he looked at her as his equal, and equality was part of their lives. And she was a very independent woman. So my husband is completely comfortable with me, my strong views, my complete independence, and he supports my career and work. So, like I really didn't face the limitations here, but it is a challenge to focus on women's rights and women's empowerment, I'm afforded a lot of independence and respect here, but my goal is to help other women here have their rights protected and be able to make the choices about their own lives. That's really at the heart of it, is equality, and being able to make decisions about how you want to live your life, whether you want to marry, whether you want to have children. And I'm in a marriage where we make our decisions about our marriage and about our family and our parenting together. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but I'd like to see other women live that way too.
You mentioned your mother-in-law, Sherri Talabany, who's like one of the first women fighters. Can you tell us a little bit about, your relationship with her and how she's influenced you and inspired you to do what you do in Iraqi Kurdistan?
Yeah, so my mother, her name is Sherri Ibrahim Ahmed. She never really, here they don't take their husband's name. She was quite a strong and independent woman. I have huge respect for her as a person and for her accomplishments. She, as you alluded to, she lived in the mountains with my father-in-law. She was actually like a photojournalist. She photographed and filmed all of those years, and she gave up, her safety to fight in the mountains, or to be with my father-in-law, and to give up her safe life to do that. And she was quite an accomplished woman. She started Kurdistan-Based the Children, which was one of the first organizations working to improve children's welfare. She started a TV conglomerate, Kurdsat. And I would say she helped women, but I wouldn't say she was ever a women's activist, because I think that she never really experienced limitations of being a woman, and she didn't see the limitations of others. And so she was a woman that was, or as a child, respected and empowered by her parents. And then as a married woman, she was respected and empowered by her husband. So she really just never knew these limitations, but she did have a hard life. One time she used to match her purse with her shoes, and she was, a very meticulous dresser and a beautiful, she cared about her appearance. And one time I asked her why she always dressed, with the matching purse and shoes. And she told me that in her life, she lost everything she owned 7 times. She was forced to flee her home and her everything she had as a child and as an adult, young adult, 7 times in her life. So, she lived in a cave when she was with my father-in-law in the mountains. She lived in a cave with mostly men. And so, she came as an adult when she had safety, and became, the first lady of Iraq. She, came to value that safety and that freedom that she had. She was quite a remarkable, she is a quite remarkable woman. And I would also say that she lived in a different era of Iraq and Kurdistan where I think women really did have fewer limitations. And things have gotten worse for women. So I hope that my children, our children, can live with fewer limitations going forward. And we're raising our daughter to be a very strong young lady. And I hope that she, embraces the freedom and independence of her grandmother. And my mother was also a strong and independent woman, very much so. So we have a lot of work to do to get back to that era where, women are fierce and strong, like my mother-in-law.
Well, I think you're doing her proud and all of us women proud. Thank you very much, Sherri, for coming onto the show. Thank you, and wish you the best of luck with all your wonderful work.
Thank you so much, Amberin.
I'm Ben Caspit, Al Monitor veteran columnist reporting from Israel, one of the world's major news and action suppliers of all times, comparing to its tiny size. I've been covering and analyzing the political, diplomatic, and military arenas in Israel for over 34 years. My best-selling biography, The Netanyahu Years, was out 2 years ago. I covered 7 prime ministers, 1 major war, 2 intifadas, 1 prime minister's assassination, 2.5 peace treaties, 4 military operations in Gaza, and it's not letting up anytime soon. I'm glad to invite you to On Israel, our brand new podcast, where we will discuss major events in Israel and its surroundings, talk to decision makers, leaders, and analysts, and try to understand the chaos that comes with the territory of Israel and the Middle East. You will never have a dull moment with us. See you soon here on Israel, Al Monitor.
So this brings us to the end of this week's podcast. Thank you for joining us, and hope to be here soon again with yet another amazing woman doing amazing work in and on the Middle East. And believe me, there are lots of them. Thank you and goodbye.